Hi guys, and welcome back to the Craft Beer channel. This week we find ourselves in an incredibly unusual location, don't we, Johnny?
We do, and it's inspired by a summer festival appearance we made at Bigfoot over the summer when we made the ultimate cola shandy.
Yeah, we've come down here to Square Root Sodas to try and recreate it, haven't we?
We have, and we're not only going to be recreating the shandy element, we're going to be brewing the beer that's going into it.
Amazing!
Cola time?
Cola time!
After over a year of lockdowns and restrictions, it's fair to say that Brad and I enjoyed our time at this year's Bigfoot Beer and Music Festival, but we were there for a good reason, kicking off the main stage every morning with a mix of light-hearted news, interviews and tasty brews. One of the segments we did was with Square Root Sodas, mixing up tasty hangover cure shandies. It was then that founder Robin came up with the bizarre suggestion of a cola and dry hopped sour shandy. Any doubts were blown away by the fact that it tasted exactly like a classic fizzy cola bottle. Over the summer we tried it with multiple different beers but never quite recreated it. So we've decided the only answer is to homebrew our own bespoke sour beer to match with Square Root's delicious cola, which first means finding out what goes into it and reuniting with Robin.
Robin, thank you so much for having us down here and getting involved on our harebrained scheme. So what's the story of Square Root Soda?
I started Square Root in my kitchen with my partner Ed. We grew it from being like a harebrained keg soda cycled to local market thing into this. So we do everything. So in a nutshell, lemons come in, lemons get processed, and then bottles of lemonade goes out the door. We work directly with farmers. We get stuff in the country that nobody else brings in. Our cola is, of course, completely natural. So instead of adding all of the weird acids and stuff that you see on the big red can, we use fresh lemon and lime juice.
Lovely.
And then instead of all the flavorings, we use organic essential oils to create the flavor that you know as cola.
I am super excited to see how cola's made. So let's go on a production tour. Quite a hairy guy, so I feel very much like a sort of nana that's going to go and get a blue rinse right now.
So this is the room where everything gets made. So the pallets of fruit come in through this door here. And then this is where they get washed. So this is a fruit washing tunnel.
Wow.
Pretty self-explanatory. You tip fruit in this end, it gets cleaned, and then it comes out the other end. There's a lot of moving.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts.
Here.
Comes out here.
Yeah, so this is currently set up for citrus. So if we were making cola, this is what it would look like.
Yeah.
So the lemons or limes would come out here. They'd drop into this tank, and then they would get trucked up into the top of this machine. They get tipped into here, where they're sort of sorted and come through this chute just here into the machine, which essentially runs, these run around in circles. And it squashes the lemons against these cups.
Wow.
So then the lemon juice gets combined with the syrup in our really small syrup mixing tank, which is here.
Yeah.
So we also sometimes rind the fruit because everything is natural, untreated. And we soak that in a sugar syrup to extract some flavor that way. So then the syrup and the juice gets combined here. So we leave it in tank usually overnight. So it's made on day 1, mixed up, and then packaged on day 2.
Much quicker than making beer.
Which is why, so we're the size that we're at, and we only have 4 tanks.
Yeah, that's really impressive actually, thinking about it.
Yeah.
So those obviously aren't fruits, but they are all natural, and this is the kind of essential oil stuff that you were telling us about.
Yeah, exactly. So this is everything that makes up our flavor of cola.
Yes.
So my favorite from the citrus is the red mandarin.
Yes.
Which I think is amazing. So if you just sort of waft your fingers towards, you're like...
Oh, wow, it's very heady, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's
it has to have a real cola sort of, I don't know, there's something I've never really thought about in cola that is quite orangey.
Yeah. I think we were interested in the lavender. I wonder if you smell it, if you can get cola, or if you get...
Oh, I get like my granny's lavender
I can smell
bush.
it from here.
That's amazing. I'd never consider lavender being a flavour component in a cola.
This is the cinnamon, which is definitely going to bring you cola. These are the essential oils, so they're distilled.
Yeah.
But yeah, the vanilla, the best way to extract that to get the really full rounded flavor is to do it in alcohol.
Yes.
So that's what we have here, much bigger tub.
Quite excited about this.
So this is a Madagascan vanilla.
Wow, wow,
About
wow.
a litre of it, so it's very expensive.
Wow.
But yeah, it just is vanilla.
Robin, these smell absolutely sublime. Now let's go and get a bottle so we can taste it.
Let's go, back this way.
Lovely. I'm a massive fan of this sort of like grenade style ring pull.
I love the noise it makes when you open it. It's
very satisfying.
That's the best part.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Okay, so I want us to go, we're going to travel back in time, back up to the main stage of Bigfoot Festival, and we came up with this amazing invention. Well, you came up with this invention, which was a dry hop sour and cola shandy.
We've never made a shandy with the cola, so I was really keen to find something that would pair really well with it.
Yeah.
And because it was hot and it was summery, I think I would have normally gone for like a dark beer to see how that worked, but I think what we wanted was something super refreshing, super quaffable.
Yeah.
So I thought sour beer.
Yeah, and the dry hop sort of nature of it as well. It all just kind of fused together to make it literally taste like a fizzy cola bottle sweet. It was kind of amazing. We kind of want to emulate it, and I've got to come up with some recipe ideas for Johnny for our own brew.
We definitely need to play up the sour elements because the fizzy cola bottle sweets have that sugar on the outside that's mixed with citric and malic acid.
Yes.
So that's what gives you the like really juicy, sour mouthfeel.
Okay, so hop-wise, I think we really need to sort of emphasize and play up the sort of fresh, zesty, citrusy, lemony nature that you can get out of certain hops. Over to you, Johnny.
Well, cheers, Brad, and cheers, Robin, for the deceptively simple brief. So I've been doing loads and loads of research into sour beers because this is the first sour beer I have ever made, and it's a bit of a rabbit hole. We talk about kettle sours as being, really simple, a little bit basic, not very complex, but the production of them is way more complicated than I remember. Now, there are two ways of quick souring a beer, and one of them is so pervasive, it's actually the phrase we use for pretty much both styles, and that's kettle souring. All that happened is you make your wort, you make your sugary liquid, so you do the mash, you transfer it to your kettle, and then you might give it like a 5-minute boil just to kill any bacteria that might be in there, and then you pitch a bacteria in there that will sour your beer. That can take 1, 2, 3 days, however long, and then you boil it again, you can add your hops, and you can ferment with a standard yeast. So all you're doing is dropping that pH and maybe adding some flavour. The other way of doing it, which isn't anywhere near as popular, is fermenter souring or co-pitching. So you'd brew your beer as normal, mash, boil into the fermenter, and then you'd pitch in whatever bacteria you're going to use to sour it, and then possibly at the same time, possibly a little later, you'd add in your yeast to ferment and produce the alcohol that you need. So the fermenter sour, the benefit of doing it that way is because you don't have to boil that wort after you've soured it, you keep some of those more volatile, complex, nuanced flavours in. And a lot of the sours that you have that might taste a little bit yogurty, a little bit like Petit Falou, those are probably fermenter soured. So you get these beautiful, rich, fruity flavours from that process. But the issue with that is you can't add any hops during the boil, because hops, they contain isoalpha acids that kill lactobacillus, which is the most likely bacteria you'll use. And that's why we added hops in the first place. It was to kill bugs, to make sure we didn't get infected beer, like hundreds of years ago. So for me, the brief that I've got from Brad and from Robin is to make something really, really hoppy. And I think that while most of that is going to be aroma that's late, I also want a little bit of bitterness to create that kind of malic acid, citric acid pop. So that means we're kettle souring, and that's probably the thought process that most brewers have when they're looking at doing a sour beer. So the process starts really simple. I'm just going to do a Berliner Weiss style grist, so that means 50% malted wheat, 50% Pilsner malt, maybe some rice hulls in there to make sure I don't get a stuck sparge, because that amount of wheat could basically turn to bread dough. And I'll make that mash. I'll mash it real warm so that I get a pretty low ABV, which is what I want from my crisp, delicious sour. And then things get complicated. So it will drip down into my grain father ready to boil, and I'll give it a 5-minute boil, kill off any bugs in there that I don't want. And then I need to choose my pitch, what bacteria I'm going to use. Now, we're going to work with Lallemand, they're our Patreon, they're amazing. And they have 2 dried sour pitches. One is literally called sour pitch, and I think it's sort of the most basic, the easiest to use, the most reliable. But they also have one called the Helveticus pitch. And this one, you have to keep the kettle at a much warmer temperature. I have to keep it over 40 degrees for the entire souring process. But what it's going to introduce, hopefully, is loads more citric character, which is what Robin and Brad really wanted.
Yes, bring out the citrus.
So that's the kind of technical side of the brewing sorted. Now I need to start thinking creatively about how I'm going to increase the amount of citric flavour that I'm getting without adding too much bitterness, and trying to get some complexity in there so that it's not just, a one-dimensional kettle sour, essentially. So I've spoken to lots of brewers, but I've also spoken to Lallemand, who have obviously advised thousands of breweries and who know their pitches best. So I spoke to Robert and to Andrew from Lallemand, and they were giving me some tips on getting the best from this recipe.
So you end up, with a lovely, refreshing, sour wort, but I don't think you could refer to it as complex. So what I always try and challenge brewers to do is, well, think about it as a base. So you've got this great soured wort, it tastes refreshing, you've hit the pH, but, what are you trying to achieve in the final beer? So you've got to view like the kind of kettle sour almost as a base layer. So what are you going to do on top of that? Are you going to add any fruits in to accentuate that acidity, to bring in different flavor? What hop profiles are you going to add in, and how's that going to work with the sourness? What yeast are you going to select? Do you want something kind of neutral and clean and just keep it really simple? Are you going to add something a bit more complex on that?
So off the back of that, what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to use a really clean yeast. I think that the Helveticus is going to give me enough depth and enough citric flavour, and I don't want to confuse it with any kind of stone fruit flavours or stuff like that. So all I'm going to do is, I'm going to hop it to fuck. I'm going to use my New England approach to hopping to try and get as much hop flavour, as much hop aroma, and as much kind of smooth bite to it as possible. And for that means a big whirlpool addition and a big dry hop addition. But I'm going to use slightly different hops to what I usually would. So instead of going for these big modern American high alpha, high flavour, high kind of juicy hops, like I could go for Citra or Azaka or stuff like that, I'm going to use motueka, which is a descendant actually of SARS. It's a New Zealand hop, and it's known for its lemon and its lime flavours, which I think is going to be perfect. And on top of that, it's got a really low alpha, so I can add loads without worrying too much about bitterness. The other one I'm going to add is quite a new hop. It's an American hop. It's called lemondrop, and that too has quite a low alpha. But that, from the name, is really well known for being really lemony, kind of sherbet lemon or lemon meringue kind of notes. And I think that in the whirlpool and in the dry hop, along with the motueka, is just going to mean that it absolutely explodes with really citrus juice notes. So I was about to hang up the call with Lallemand when Andrew and Robert introduced the third way. And the third way of souring is not a bacteria, and it's not a brewer's yeast.
Many brewers get this strain, and the first thing that it does is kind of terrify them, because it behaves very differently to how a regular brewing yeast would behave. But what it does is it ferments all the wort sugars, but to start with, before it starts fermenting the wort sugars, it ferments glucose, and it ferments that into lactic acid. So at the start of fermentation, you get this weird sort of lag phase where it's, for 2 days, doesn't really move in gravity, and all the brewers are like, oh dear, what's going on here? But if you actually measure the pH plummets. So you don't have an infection risk there, because you're souring the wort already, which will prevent any nasties getting in.
Mm-hmm.
But then 2 days later, it will start to get into the regular wort sugars, and it will start to take off. So you sort of see this weird kind of delayed fermentation curve where nothing happens, and then it kind of plummets right down and finishes up kind of like a standard brew. But it's really quite different to your standard brewing yeast, so people aren't really sure what to make of it when they first see it. But when they get it in and it works, they love it.
Where's it come from? What's the origin? Was it used in brewing, or was it from something else?
No, so it was isolated for us by the University of the Sciences in Philadelphia, but they actually did it in a kind of a yeast wrangling type technique. So they went around and isolated yeast off various things and then did lots of brewing with it and just tried to see whether it could use wort sugars and then whether they could use it in a brewery. So I think it was isolated from I think it was an oak tree. Correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but it was an oak tree inside the kind of, they call it a graveyard, but it's not really a graveyard. It looks like a memorial park with some graves in it in Philadelphia, but it was isolated from a tree in there.
So I really, really want to try this out. I don't think that it's quite right for what I need. I want to get as much acidity out of it, and I think that Philly Sour gives you a very, restrained and a very reliable amount of sour. But I do have a second fermenter now. And if it's that simple, I think it's worth having a go. Now, while we were at Square Brew, Robin mentioned a certain varietal of Coca-Cola. And it kind of stuck in my mind as something like, I need to return to that because I might have an idea around there. And then when Lallemond mentioned this incredibly simple but very reliable, utterly mind-blowing way of making a quick sour, a couple of things clicked in my mind. So without Brad knowing, without Robin knowing, I think it would be cool if I also made a cherry version.